Suppose we can get started. Thank you all so much for being here. My name is Linden Steinmann, and I'm here from Portland, Oregon, to speak with you today. I'm really excited to be here. This studio itself is so beautiful. I can't wait to look around afterwards. But yeah, I'm excited to be here mostly because I used to be a textile art student, just like you all. I know some of y'all are in different departments, but yeah, I just wanted to talk to y'all about what I do now for work and how I got here. As I said, I was once a textile art student just like you. I graduated in 2012 from Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina with a Bachelor in Fine Arts. I have a dual concentration in metalsmithing, jewelry design, and fiber arts. I call myself a textile nerd personally and professionally because textiles are both my job and one of my many time-consuming hobbies. I have 2 looms at home in my 500 square foot apartment. One is a big floor loom. It fortunately folds up against the wall, so it can be stored. The other one is a tabletop loom. After college, I thought I wanted to go to grad school for metalsmithing immediately and become a metalsmithing professor. I wound up doing all sorts of other things instead. I moved to the Virgin Islands. I moved to Vail, Colorado to be a ski instructor. I worked at restaurants. I volunteered with activist campaigns. And I worked in national parks. I've had all kinds of jobs, and I would encourage y'all to have some fun after college and do your thing. Or if you want to go directly into the workforce, that's fine too. So I have had some jobs related to my degree in art and jewelry design, metalsmithing, and textiles. I used to work for an artist and metalsmith in Vail, Colorado, in his galleries and studios. That's J. Cotter Gallery. And I worked for a small cashmere company called Chocolate and Cashmere in Taos, New Mexico. What I did for them, I was a stitcher. And so that was the knitters at the company would knit cashmere fabric on a knitting machine, and then I would take that fabric and stitch it into a hat or a skirt or what have you. I worked for my friend's company, Fiber Revolution. They're amazing. Y'all should look them up. Their goal is to bring linen production back to the United States. Linen is from the plant flax, as many of y'all probably know, but that's their goal. And it probably sounds like I have a lot of art and textile industry experience. A lot of these jobs, though, were not like my full-time gig at the time. It was part-time work or full-time work that didn't necessarily pay the bills, so I was working lots of jobs at once. Just want to be clear that, a little bit of experience here and there, but yeah, you take what you can get and then move forward with it. My trajectory has definitely been anything but linear, and but it has led me to something that I'm really passionate about, and that does pay the bills, which is my current job. So how did I get here? How did I wind up being an organic inspector? It's kind of a niche job, but it is oddly perfect for me. It's sort of like where my interests and my values overlap. So it all started long before, but in 2014, I sought out a farm to woof on, and woofing stands for Willing Workers on Organic Farms. It's an organization that matches people who want to learn on an organic farm with farmers who need help. So I did that one summer during the off season from ski season. So when you're a ski instructor, you have to figure something else out to do in the summer. I wanted to learn all aspects of farming, but I looked specifically for a farm that was processing animal fibers. I wound up at Common Treasury Farm in Alsea, Oregon. This picture is of me standing on that farm with a table runner that I wove in kato lin, which is common linen. So I wound up on this farm in 2014. They were processing sheep's wool and growing fiber flax. This farmer friend is the one who started Fiber Revolution. So I learned all aspects of farming, from shearing sheep, how to skirt and clean fleeces of sheep, and all about fiber flax. I remained great friends with the farmers, and in 2017, they needed a farm sitter. The restaurant I had been working at in Portland had just closed, and I had an employment and nothing else going on, so I went to farm sit for a few months while the owners were in Europe. The owners of this farm are professionals in the organic industry, and they encouraged me to get into the industry. They were like, you like textiles and you like organics, you should do this job. I was like, okay, that sounds good. I was 27 at the time, and I really just wanted a career. I was looking at getting into tech and coding boot camp and all of this stuff, but it really just wasn't for me. And, this opportunity came up, and it seemed a lot more aligned with my interests and values, so I went for it. I continued to live on this farm for the next year while I worked through my trainings. The trainings were through an organization called IOIA, which is the International Organic Inspectors Association. And I will tell you, it's a lot cheaper than grad school, so it's a cool option. It's kind of like trade school for organic inspectors. But I inspected several different USDA organic scopes that covers more food, as well as the Global Organic Textile Standard. And I will later talk about what each of these are and the differences between the two. But I kind of want to back up and talk about textiles in general and why I'm so passionate about them. I know that a lot of textile art students are in the room, and we've got a bunch of textile nerds in general, so let's chat about textiles. They're just so central to our lives. We're in them all day, every day. Unless you're naked in the shower, but then you step out and you immediately reach for a towel, and that's a textile. And you put on clothes, those are textiles. You might get in a car. Cars are full of textiles. A seatbelt is a woven textile. So you go about your day, and you're interacting with textiles that you don't even think about, like a dishcloth or a face mask or a couch. And then you get in bed at night, and you lay on a mattress that's made of textiles, and you pull up your sheets and covers, and even your pillow is made of textiles. So when you really think about it, textiles are everywhere and in everything, and there are industries all around the world that produce them. Textiles also define cultures. When you think of cultures around the world, you think of their food and their manner of dress frequently. They're one of the major markers of culture. Historically and today, they denote status and meaning within cultures. We can look at each of these photos and sort of infer what part of the world the textile came from. Don't even get me started on how textiles are interwoven into our language. Human history is defined by textiles. They've really driven human history forward. It's said that if textiles didn't biodegrade, historic ages might be defined by textiles instead of the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the Bronze Age, etc. But textiles do biodegrade, or at least they should, but we will get to that later. And thus are frequently not part of the archaeological record. Things like stone and metal tools and pottery shards remain. Things like clothing and baskets typically do not. When you investigate textiles' role in history, you start to find some pretty astonishing truths. I'm not going to get too deep into any of these histories, but just think about how important these are to human history. The Silk Road created trade across continents. Sailcloth allowed humans to explore the globe. Mummy wrappings, which are made of linen, crucial to Egyptian culture. The linen itself was considered very sacred and very important in bringing the person who had passed into the afterlife, so it wasn't just a means of preservation of the body. And, many deaf cultures throughout the world also use textiles, like a shroud is a textile. The Medici, the wool traders from Florence, were wool traders, the bankers from Florence were wool traders before they were bankers. So in essence, textiles funded the Renaissance because that's where the money came from. Cotton was actually grown in the Americas and throughout the world well before colonization. I put in this photo here to point out that cotton doesn't just grow in the color white. It grows naturally in colors. And wild cottons will frequently come in a variety of colors. This is actually a photo on a person that I work with, farm, who is a colored cotton breeder. But obviously in this country, cotton has a fraught and shameful history. Cotton plantations in the American South were what led 9 million African people to be removed from their homes and forced into slavery. And this was all to fulfill Britain's appetite for fine textiles. With this huge influx of cotton onto the market at the time, There were also lots of innovations in the textile industry. So notably, the jacquard loom, invented in 1804. This changed a lot of things in the world. But this was a new loom. A lot of y'all probably know this, but the jacquard loom was a new loom that made it easier to create patterns in the textile. So previously, an actual person called a draw boy, which was very likely an actual boy because child labor was a thing, would pick up individual threads in order to create the pattern. And the jacquard loom eliminated the need for that person to do that by using punch cards instead. So the Luddites, you might have heard the term Luddite as someone who rejects or dislikes technology, but the original Luddites were textile workers who were rebelling against this new loom, and they believed it would eliminate their jobs, and they were dead serious, y'all. They burnt down a lot of textile mills. But they might have been onto something, because what we have now is kind of a disaster in the textile industry and otherwise. Oh yeah, on the last slide. The jacquard loom did directly lead to the invention of the computer, and I'm not going to leave you hanging there. I will explain that a little bit. Again, the jacquard loom, invented by Joseph Marie Jacquard, it used punch cards, which are pictured here, to relay a pattern into the textile. Ada Lovelace, this woman pictured here, she was a mathematician. She was also the poet Lord Byron's daughter, no big deal. But she saw the connection between the punch cards being used on the loom and what her colleague Charles Babbage was working on with the analytical engine, which is widely considered the first computer. The analytical engine used punch cards to perform mathematical calculations. Computers continued to use these punch cards for some time, including into the space programs, who actually sent people to space on this type of computer. And then NASA continued to develop the computer to not need punch cards because they weren't very efficient for the Apollo missions, which sent humanity to the moon. So thanks, textiles, you have done so much. Gotta pause for water real quick. Okay, so kind of back to what I do for work. Again, I am an inspector and auditor. I work for a company called Oregon Tilth, and I inspect to both USDA organic standards and the GOTS standards. So differences and similarities between the two. USDA organic regulates food, alcohol, and some personal care products, such as beauty products. GOTS regulates textiles, including some personal care products such as tampons and cotton swabs. Other commonly used certified GOTS products are clothing, home goods, sheets, towels, bedding, mattresses, things of that nature. USDA organic is a federally regulated standard. I work for a certifier, again, called Oregon Tilth, that is accredited through the USDA. So I don't work for the government. A lot of people ask if I work for the government. I don't, thank goodness. Other countries have their own standards, organic standards, but in the US it's the USDA. GOTS, it's in the name. It's a global organic textile standard. That means it's the same in every country in the world. And GOTS is based in Berlin, Germany. The standard was written by folks in Berlin. So USDA organic starts in the field at the farm level, the actual crops growing in the field. And then GOTS starts at the first textile processing step post-harvest. This is frequently a cotton gin. The USDA or applicable country standard covers the actual crop, the cotton growing in the field. USDA organic does not have any kind of social compliance portion of the standard, but it does positively impact workers by not exposing them to toxic chemicals. GOTS does have a social compliance portion. There are rules about how the workers must be treated. So you can kind of think of GOTS as like organic and fair trade rolled into one standard. There is a lot more to organic standards than just don't use pesticides, like a lot more. If that's all it was, I wouldn't have a job. A common misconception is that no chemicals are used in organics, but everything is a chemical. The air we breathe, water is a chemical. The difference with organics is that the chemicals used must undergo a material review approval process to ensure that they are not posing a threat to the environment. And there are very smart scientists that are doing that. That is not my job, thank goodness. So another common misconception is that organic is about individual personal health. So there's this idea that organics are better for you, the individual. That is true to an extent, but it's not the way that I look at it. I see organic as about communal and environmental health. That being said, I would never police anyone eating organic, as many people cannot afford food. And I would also never say that you need to buy organic clothes. So talking a little bit more about what the GOTS standard is. So with GOTS, for the finished product, at least 70% of the product's composition has to be organic. In order to be organic, it has to be of agricultural origin. So the primary fibers that are of agricultural origin are cotton, wool, linen, hemp, silk, and kapok. Kapok is not very common, but it is somewhat similar to cotton in that it's a fluffy fiber that grows in a seed pod. It doesn't spin particularly well from my understanding, so what I've seen it used as is pillow stuffing frequently. So GOTS regulates not only the type of textiles that can be used, but the types of dyes, processing aids, auxiliaries, accessories, etc. As textile people, we know that one does not simply dye a textile. There's a lot more that goes into it. You have your mordants and other pretreatments and, rinses, etc., detergents. All of those things under GOTS would have to undergo a material review. So GOTS does, again, have a social compliance portion, which ensures fair treatment of the workers. We'll talk about that more in a moment. To get a little bit more technical into GOTS, since we do have industry professionals and future industry professionals here, what is allowed is, again, at least 70% has to be certified organic fibers of agricultural origin. The remaining 30% can be non-GMO animal or vegetable fibers, non-GMO lyocell, which y'all are probably familiar with, but lyocell is a wood pulp fiber. Recycled synthetics are allowed up to 30%. Non-GMO PLAs, which are bioplastics that biodegrade. And then up to 10% can be regenerated fibers, such as, again, lyocell, viscose, or modal. The raw fibers have to be non-GMO. And certain types of virgin synthetic fibers, stainless steel, and mineral fibers. What is not allowed is conventional cotton, conventional angora, virgin polyester, acrylic, asbestos, carbon, and silver fibers, and mulesed wool. Mulesing is a process. It's to prevent a disease on sheep called fly strike, but it's widely considered very cruel because they just remove the skin on the animal's thumb, and it's painful to the animal. So mule's wool is not allowed under GOTS. So you'll see that GOTS is generally encouraging limited use of synthetics, with the understanding that they are sometimes needed. So, you think of a waistband needing to be stretchy, this would require elastic, which may be a synthetic. But this is just a little bit of an overview of GOTS. This is the extreme basics. There's a lot more rules. The new version of the standard just came out, and it's 50 pages long, and then there's addendums. So this is just sort of an overview of GOTS and what it is. And then there is the social accountability portion. So this is a good, half of every inspection I do. It's dedicated to social accountability. So the rules are these. No forced labor. No slavery is allowed to be used. No child labor. No discrimination and harassment. Efforts are made towards gender equality. Freedom of association and collective bargaining. That means the workers must be able to unionize if they want to. Occupational health and safety. Fair remuneration, which means pay. So we obviously make sure that they pay, minimum wage, but We also require every GOTS certified entity to assess a living wage gap. And what that means is they'll go to this website. It's run by MIT, and they can go and select their state and their county and look up what a living wage for their area is, and then they compare it in a chart to what they're paying. And if they're paying more than the living wage, great. If they're paying less than the living wage, GOTS is now, with the new version of the standard, requiring them to make a plan to get to living wage. So it's not like you must pay living wage right away. It's like make a plan to get to living wage. So yeah, that's pretty great. Working time has to be reasonable. Overtime has to be voluntary. No precarious employment. There are a few different examples of that, but basically it's like one example would be you can't hire someone as a 1099 worker when they're actually an employee. That is also illegal. A lot of these things obviously are illegal, but you still see a lot, and I'll get to that in a moment. So there are specific protections for migrant workers, and then social compliance management just means that each company has to have a policy, and that usually looks like an employee handbook or something of that nature to cover, all of these bullet points. So what types of operations do I inspect and go to? I inspect the entire supply chain, which is awesome. I love it. I love to see, how things are made and how they come together. But I kind of put these in order of like how they flow in the supply chain. So cotton gins, that is where the seed is removed from the raw cotton that has just been harvested. And so that usually looks like a big building full of machinery, and it's pulling the seed and other plant material out of the cotton. So I go to those. Cotton cleaning operations. Once the cotton is ginned, sometimes it requires more cleaning. And sometimes this is a dry process of more machinery, just removing dust and dirt and other plant material from the cotton. Sometimes this is a wet process where water and chemicals are applied to the cotton. This is pretty common in medical applications. The cotton has to be further cleaned. So for at least GOTS certified things, that's been tampons and cotton balls. Non-woven facilities, a good example of a non-woven is like a disposable face mask now. Those are non-wovens. Felt is also a non-woven. So I go to non-woven facilities, and wool mills, love going to wool mills. So the wool mills that I'm working with are, they're carding and they're producing like a wool batting that then goes into the, typically the bedding industry, so either into a mattress or a comforter. Felt factories, again, that's usually going into the bedding industry. I don't do any felt related to clothing. Knitters. Knitters would be taking yarn, like on the picture on the right, and then knitting it into a flat fabric. That flat fabric would then go to a cut and sew facility. So that would be them cutting and sewing it into a garment or bedding or what have you. Bedding and home goods is really big in GOTS. Mattress manufacturers also very big in GOTS. I love mattress factories. I never thought I would be so fascinated by mattresses, but there's a lot of different components and bits and pieces that go into a mattress, and I just find it totally fascinating. Clothing brands, I put adult and children's clothing brands. People are really into what their kids are wearing in terms of toxicity to the child. Like a baby's skin is actually 5 times thinner than an adult's, so they're more susceptible to chemical influence. So GOTS is really big in the children's clothing industry. I work with some pretty heavy hitters in the children's clothing industry, like big name brands. Adult clothing, smaller brands, but they're really cool. They're doing really cool things. And I will say that all of the clothing brands that I'm working with, their manufacturing is overseas. So when I'm working with these brands, I'm just working with the brand itself or a corporate office. And sometimes I'll go to their distribution center here in the United States, but again, the manufacturing is all overseas, primarily in Asia. Tampon factories, that was a really cool one. I loved going to the tampon factory, totally fascinating. If you're a person that uses tampons, again, I'm never going to tell you need to eat organic food or you need to buy organic clothes, but organic tampons, I will say opt for those if you can, just because it's something that goes in you rather than on you. Conventional cotton is disgusting. It's gross. It's heavily pesticide laden, and as I mentioned, it's not only the cotton growing in the field, but then it might get cleaned by one of those cotton cleaning operations, and they use chemicals, and they are not subject to a chemical review by a third party. So I don't know what those chemicals are, but they do. So I'm concerned. Textile importers and traders. Again, this is usually me going to a corporate office of people who are importing fabric or yarn. And a lot of those clients never even touch the product. They're just shipping directly from person to person. It's kind of like they're handling the logistics of the product. Notably missing from this list are spinners and dye houses. There are currently no GOTS certified spinners or dye houses in North America at this time. So if anybody goes into the industry and wants to get on that, that would be awesome. I know a lot of people who would love to see GOTS certified spinning and dyeing in North America. But yeah, as you can tell, there's just a lot of different things that I do. I see a lot of different industries, and this is only the textile side of what I do. I also go to food processing facilities and farms. So my job is very diverse, and it takes me all over the place. I like to say that I go from the cotton fields of Texas to the garment district of LA, and I even have a client in the Empire State Building. They fall under the textile importers and traders category. But yeah, I'm all over North America. I go from Mexico City to Montreal and all across the United States. There are other people in other countries doing my job, so that's how we assure that it's got certified throughout the chain. So I put in this slide just to give an example of a product that I looked at the entire supply chain. I worked with this company. They're a baby and kids company who was creating a dry baby wipe, which was just sort of an odd product. They're actually not producing it anymore. But their idea was that you can take the dry baby wipe and just run some water on it and then use it. But their corporate office is located in New York City, and I was able to see the entire supply chain for this product. It was made 100% in the United States of America, which is really rare for textiles. It's often said that cotton travels twice around the world before it gets to you. This product certainly bounces back and forth across the country a couple of times, but yeah. So I went to each of these facilities. So the life cycle of a baby wipe. The cotton was grown in the field and ginned in Texas. It then was cleaned at a facility in Mississippi. It was then turned into a non-woven. So again, a baby wipe is a great example of a non-woven in South Carolina. The non-woven web it gets sent in a big roll to a facility in California. It then gets cut into individual baby wipes and packaged into its final packaging. It then gets shipped to Pennsylvania to a distribution center where the individual products would go out to the customers. It bounces around the country a lot. And this is the simplest finished product that I have worked with. So you can imagine something like clothing or a mattress and how much goes into that, and it's not hard to imagine how it would go around the world twice before it got to you. And this is also a product that winds up in the trash, so we're essentially shipping trash back and forth across the country. but at least, it's cotton and it will biodegrade. A lot of baby wipes are synthetic. Most baby wipes are synthetic. Again, this is the simplest possible product that I have certified. Yeah, so it's pretty mind-blowing. What do I do in a typical day at a GOTS inspection at my job? The answer to that is mostly paperwork with both, the USDA standards and GOTS. What happens is the operator has to prove that they're following the rules 365 days a year. It's not just on the day of the inspection. So I look through their records and assure that they are doing what they say that they're doing. The records also prove that the product is organic. So with this last slide, there's something called a transaction certificate in GOTS that is issued between each and every step of the supply chain. So transaction certificate between each of these steps, and that is how we trace back to the product growing in the field and be assured that it is organic. So typical day, I would do a general records review. Audit trail exercises are essentially fraud prevention. So we're tracing the operator's product through their system. We would do a tour of the facility. That's usually the fun part, but it's also usually quite short. A tour might last like 15 minutes. The rest of the audit will take 5 hours or so. So again, it's mostly paperwork, but I also do a social accountability and HR records review. So that looks like me sitting down with an HR department to talk about how their company policies overlap with the GOTS standards. And then to make sure that everything's actually being followed, I talk to the employees. And through employee interviews, I interview a percentage of employees at every company that I go to, and just talk to them generally about what it's like to work for the company, but also make sure that the GOTS standards are being upheld. Sometimes I will take a sample. That has so far always been raw cotton from the cotton gins. It gets sent to a lab and analyzed for pesticide and GMO residue. So that's a typical day at an inspection. I then write a report about my findings, which undergoes a review process by a different person. So there's a lot of checks and balances in organics. My report undergoes a review process, and someone else reviews it, and they present the client or the operator with their certification decision. If there are issues, we work with the operator to resolve them. It's not a pass-fail system. I often come home from work and people are like, did they pass? And I'm like, that's not how it works. So I'm just going to go ahead and address this because everybody always wants to know, what is the worst thing you've ever seen? People are eager to hear about fraud and people breaking the rules. I will say that outright fraud is just not that common. These operators, the clients are paying a lot of money and putting forth a lot of effort to adhere to the standards, so it just isn't in their interest to break the rules. Fraud certainly does occur, sometimes on a huge scale, as in the case of 20,000 tons of fraudulent organic cotton in India several years ago. The general public and news organizations like the New York Times like to sensationalize this and point to it as an example of the failing of the system, but in fact, detecting fraud is the system doing its job. So I put in these things by the New York Times. I guess my issue with both of these articles is it's sort of like a fatalistic way of looking at things. I feel like the message that they're saying is like, there's no answer, there's nothing you can do. Like, that organic cotton t-shirt is not as organic as you think, and cotton totes are just causing more problems than they're solving, and that kind of thing. So I don't appreciate the attitude, and I don't appreciate a lot of things that the New York Times, the ways that they report. I think there's some questionable journalism going on. They've reported on a lot of other things that I've been personally involved with, and reported in a way that I was like, who did you interview? I don't understand, but they're also right now reporting on trans issues in a way that's really awful and siding with J.K. Rowling, and I'm not about that. So, hating on the New York Times. So anyway, back to the worst thing that I've ever seen. The worst thing that I see by far is labor violations. Even though a lot of practices are not technically illegal, they're certainly not ethical. The federal minimum wage is unethical, period. The worst thing I've seen in labor conditions in cotton gins in Texas. So a cotton gin, again, removes the seed from the cotton. It's a big building full of machinery. They're so loud. It's crazy loud. It's like you're standing next to a freight train. And they run 24 hours a day during ginning season. They're extremely dusty. Tons of dirt and plant material in the air. Cotton itself is in the air. Some people will get what's called white lung, real thing, from inhaling too much cotton. You walk in and frequently I immediately like sneeze or cough, or you get cotton in your eyes, and it's very unpleasant. So the workers should be wearing face masks and earplugs. They frequently don't. That is their choice. I don't really blame them, because a lot of these people are working in the gym for a really long day, a really long shift, and it's uncomfortable, and you're less aware of your surroundings with earplugs in, and they do their best to make it a safe environment, but there is machinery that can be dangerous. So yeah, prior to the pandemic, I was always seeing gin laborers being paid the federal minimum wage, and working insane amounts of overtime, like 115 hours a week. So you do the math, that's more than 16 hours a day. That's every waking moment of your life in a cotton gin. Ginning is seasonal. It usually lasts between like October and March, so it's like 6 months out of the year. And that's why this amount of overtime is allowed. Again, usually under GOTS, the overtime has to be voluntary, but because it's seasonal and considered the industry standard, GOTS does allow for this amount of overtime in the cotton gins. So these things, they aren't actually against the law or even the GOTS standard, but, still not quite ethical. So again, ginning might be seasonal, but the people working in the gin, it's not like they work 6 months and then they take the other 6 months off. They're frequently migrant laborers, and so they are working another agricultural job. I often ask them, what are you going to do in the off season? And they're like blueberries or this and that. So they're working another agricultural job and working incredibly hard for some of the year as well. I recently had a young woman, this was this season, tell me, she was 20 years old, but she said, it's my first year in the cotton gin, and she was all excited about that because she then went on to tell me that she had been working in the cotton fields since she was 11 years old, and she was proud of this. But yeah, things like that are very humbling, and they're happening in the United States of America. So, I will report that since after the pandemic, wages have increased dramatically in the cotton gins. I'm not seeing like anybody making less than $12 an hour. In a lot of cases, I'm seeing less overtime as well. I mean, yeah, the employers have had to become more competitive since the pandemic and pay people more. Other than that, I've had direct complaints of racism, and I've had direct complaints of discrimination and harassment, and then I have to go on and report very objectively about those things in my report, and it's eye-opening for sure. I once had an HR department tell me outright, we will do everything in our power to prevent our workers from unionizing, which is not only against the GOTS standards, but that's illegal. So it's funny what people say to your face sometimes. So why are we talking so much about labor stuff? I thought we were going to talk about bucolic, beautiful cotton growing in the field, cottagecore, whatever. Chico Mendes said, environmentalism without class struggle is just gardening. And we are not gardening, my friends. We're trying to save the world, like actually save it. So, I will also say, class struggle interlinked with so many other struggles, race struggles and gender struggles all throughout the world. So it's all interlinked. We want to be intersectional environmentalists, not gardeners. And we don't have a lot of room to mess around when things like this are happening. There are sweatshops in Los Angeles. I think a lot of people don't realize that. An extremely common misconception that I come across is that made in the USA equals good and made in China, India, or Bangladesh equals bad. This is not true at all. With GOTS, you have assurance that a third-party auditor like me is inspecting every step of the supply chain, no matter what country it's in. And they're also assuring that the workers are being treated well. What's going on in this slide, what's happening here, where they're saying that workers are being paid $1.58 an hour. This is due to a practice called piece rate work, and so employees get paid by the piece, like each garment that they create, and it's usually pennies per piece. So that's how they wind up paying less than federal minimum wage. Piece rate work is allowed under GOTS, but you have to ensure that the piece rate work equates to at least the federal minimum, if not like more the industry standard. So I've never seen piece rate work used in any of the GOTS factories that I've inspected, but it is technically allowed. You just have to make sure they're being paid appropriately. And also I will mention that in Xinjiang, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, in Northwest China, there is forced labor occurring right now. There are labor camps, otherwise known as slavery, occurring, and many brands are pulling out of China for that reason right now. I see a lot of people moving their manufacturing to Mexico, which I think is pretty cool. I would love to see more textile manufacturing in North America, and I've been to textile places in Mexico, and they're amazing. But yeah, there's a lot going on in the world. So yeah, another issue with textiles, major one, is synthetics. The issue with synthetics is that they are both petroleum derived and they don't biodegrade. So this is kind of, sorry y'all, where I just have been pulling things from my Instagram to demonstrate the points that I'm trying to make. I will not be offended if you want to take out your phone and follow these people. They're rad. But the slide on the left points out that every fabric that isn't made from a natural fiber, silk, cotton, linen, rayon, I will make a note, y'all probably know this, but rayon is from wood pulp typically, but it's a chemically intensive process to make, and it doesn't biodegrade. So it's not environmentally great. Wool, leather, fur, also natural materials. Everything that's not made of those is made of petroleum. So polyester, acrylic, nylon, spandex, they are all from fossil fuels. An alarming amount of petroleum is being diverted into the textile industry. It is a growing sector. Everyone is talking about moving away from fossil fuels in other areas of our lives, but they're ignoring plastics being used in our textiles. I will say also that organic agriculture has an added benefit in that it does not allow the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, and those are petroleum-based, surprise, surprise. So just another benefit of organics. Another New York Times thing that I'm gonna hate on a little bit. New York Times telling you how to do your laundry. And I guess my issue with this slide is that it's placing the burden on the individual. We can all certainly make individual effort, but I think that really what needs to happen is corporations need to make changes. But they're telling you how to do your laundry in order to reduce microfiber pollution, and then this wonderful company called All Employer Charles Clothing just says, or stop buying synthetic clothes. They're really rad. They're making sweaters out of yak wool. So they saw this issue with cashmere. They're kind of answering to the cashmere industry. The issue with cashmere is that it's from goats. Goats are notoriously destructive animals, and they're causing a lot of desertification in Mongolia. And Oliver Charles looked at this and they said, well, why don't we make sweaters out of yak wool. The yaks are already on the landscape. They naturally live there, and they're not causing the kind of damage that the goats are. They are also starting to make sweaters out of seaweed. I have no idea how that process works. I would like to look into it more, but pretty cool idea. So let's see. A couple more little infographics for you. What people think sustainable fashion is. Spending a lot of money on sustainable brands. No, I'm not here to tell you to go buy an organic capsule wardrobe. That's not what I'm saying. Fast fashion, sustainable collections, those are just like not in the same category. Fast fashion and sustainability are just no. Wearing shapeless linen and earth tones. I happen to like linen and earth tones, but I think they're saying you don't have to dress like a hippie in order to have a sustainable wardrobe. So what it actually is wearing the clothes you already have. If you're anything like me, you have a ton of clothes. You probably have all the clothes that you need. Thrifting, I would like to add to that like consignment and vintage shopping, because thrifting is a specific thing. Thrift stores have things priced at a specific price point, and there's a good argument to say that we should leave thrifting for people who need to buy things at that price point. If you got to shop at that price point, that's totally fine. But if you have the means to shop consignment or vintage, there's so many options for that. Purchasing from sustainable brands. If you do need to buy something new, lots of sustainable brands out there. Mending, washing with care, just making sure that the clothes that you already have last for a long time. And then a couple of other examples. I like this other one. Sustainability isn't something you can purchase. It's unlearned habits, mindfulness. I don't know about the word mindfulness, but but I like the last part of this. Seeking an understanding of how consumption is intersected with other systems and values, or systems and issues. So again, intersectional environmentalism, not just gardening. Things that seem like solutions but aren't. Recycled water bottles. This one bothers me. I mean, I'm holding a water bottle right now, but they're taking this, which already pretty much shouldn't exist, and then turning it into a textile. And that's essentially creating microplastics, because again, textiles are something that is washed. I saw this company one time that is making yoga pants out of recycled water bottles, and they sell the yoga pants with a mesh bag that you're supposed to wash the yoga pants in your washing machine so that the microplastics don't wind up in the water stream. And I'm just like, why? Baseball? I'm like, no. So bamboo, it looks so nice and so pretty, green and sustainable. It is amazing for so many other applications. Building, something like, say, like a cutting board, housing, wonderful, wonderful applications for bamboo. But in the textile industry, it's a no for me, because bamboo is rayon, and it's a very chemically intensive process. And then the end result doesn't biodegrade. So it's not just about where it's from, but about where it goes. Vegan leather and fur that's made of plastic, not a solution at all. There's a lot of people doing really amazing vegan leathers from like mushrooms. I've seen pineapple leather, cactus leather. Those are some better options. They have varying degrees of sustainability, I would say. I would make an argument for just actually buying leather that already exists, so like vintage leather. That's my feeling, but some people don't want to do that. Brands with sustainability claims and no degrowth strategy. This is a big one. It's absolutely crucial that brands have a degrowth strategy. Hardly any brands do, though. Capitalism is a thing. So, unfettered growth is the antithesis to sustainability. So without a degrowth strategy, in my mind, a brand is not truly sustainable. A brand that comes to mind here is Patagonia. They're doing a lot of amazing things. They're funding a lot of incredible projects in the textile industry and otherwise. They do a lot, and they make some of their clothes out of things like hemp and cotton, but they're still making a ton of clothes out of plastic, and they don't have a degrowth strategy. So in my mind, they have some work to do. Things that are actually solutions. You all, as the future of the textile industry, go forth and create not plastic objects, please. Third-party certification, that's what I do. Again, you have to ensure that the brands are actually doing what they say that they're doing. So without third-party certification, it's what we call in the industry a self-claim. And, frequently it's just greenwashing. So greenwashing is everywhere. But, third-party certification can ensure that people are not just using greenwashing. Moving away from petroleum-based textiles and towards renewables. Analyzing the end of life is for the textiles that we use, because again, it's not just about where it's from, it's about where it goes, where it winds up. We don't want it to wind up in the ocean or in a giant pile in a country like Ghana that does not have the resources to just manage these huge piles of textile trash that we are sending them. Degrowth, again, absolutely crucial. Carbon beneficial textiles do exist. So there's carbon beneficial wool in the world. This occurs because animals moving across the landscape, so a sheep moving across the landscape, it's a very natural process and it creates carbon drawdown. I can explain a little bit more about that later if y'all would like. But yeah, carbon beneficial, carbon negative wool actually exists. The animals moving across the landscape do enough good to offset, not only offset, the end product, but yeah, do a little bit more. But ultimately, regulation, corporations are not going to do this on their own. So, be it third-party regulation or government regulation, a lot of things should be illegal. Let's get real. So, yeah, the corporations aren't going to do it on their own. Consumer pressure helps a lot here as well. But, yeah, certain things need to be regulated for sure. I wanted to point to a couple of high fashion examples of rad sustainability efforts. Iris Van Harpen on the left, incredible designer. She's using tons of recycled materials in her work. This particular look is recycled mylar and silk. And then Giselle on the right, I believe this was at the Met Gala a few years ago. The gown is designed by Versace. Versace is not a GOTS certified company, but the silk in the gown is GOTS certified. I love high fashion. I'm sure a lot of y'all do too. So it's great to see sustainability efforts there. And if we believe what Miranda Priestley says in her iconic monologue in The Devil Wears Prada about cerulean trickling down through the fashion industry, we would hope that these sustainability efforts will continue to trickle down into everyday wearables as well. But at the risk of ending on a too political note, this is our real answer. This is what we got, y'all. Anti-capitalism. Even if you don't go into the textile industry, we can all be better anti-capitalists. Just creating a cultural shift away from capitalism and excess consumption in every aspect of our lives. And, really making that the cool thing to do. So no more Instagram influencers with their fast fashion hauls, no more celebrities taking 30-minute flights. That stuff is, to say the least, deeply uncool. So just creating a cultural shift away from capitalism, because again, as I've said many times, unfettered growth is the antithesis to sustainability. So we have a lot of work to do. There is a lot of things standing in our way, I'm not going to lie to y'all. But I'm going to keep fighting, and I hope that y'all will too. Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes for questions. So in one of your beginning slides, you showed a picture of the color cotton, and I did actually a project in the fall on colored cotton and how we would maybe put it down. Was that with Sally Fox that you worked with and everything like that? I would love to hear about that.
Yeah.
She is amazing.
Yes, she's a hero of mine for sure. Yes, it was Sally Fox.
How did you get connected with her? What was
Through GOTS. She's GOTS certified. Yeah.
Do people work in the same kind of I guess line as you do
I go international, but just North America. I would say that some bigger organic certifiers might be sending their people more broadly, but I mean, you also have to think about like the carbon impact of my job. Like I fly everywhere. I'm on multiple planes a week. Hopefully that is offset by the good that we're doing in the industry. But yeah, they kind of try to keep people local, but there's so few people doing my job that I wind up getting sent all over the continent. And I imagine that someday, I might not be doing this particular job forever, but this is my line of work, and I want to remain in sustainable textiles. So eventually, I definitely hope that it will take me, further than North America.
There's that scandal recently. I don't know if you heard about it, but the organic tampons. I don't know, like I don't know if you have carcinogens or some kind of really harmful chemical. I think that's just like greenwashing, or could something like that slip by?
That's a great question. I could totally answer that question if I knew what certification it had and where it's being produced. Is it really? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, it's not perfect. It's certainly not perfect.
Could you repeat the question? I don't know that all of us heard it.
There was a recent scandal about carcinogens in organic tampons.
Okay, that's the part I didn't hear.
No, I did not heard about that, but I will definitely look more into it. Thanks.
What does degrowth mean exactly for companies?
It just means that there has to be a limit to how much that they're producing, basically. They can't just produce tons of stuff indefinitely. So that just isn't. That's not what sustainability is.
So even if it's organic, there's just a limit on.
I would say so, yeah. I mean, manufacturing is just so energy intensive. Like everything that we, interact with in the world is manufactured somewhere, and it's so energy intensive. So, I would say even with organic products, for sure they've got to have a degrowth strategy, or just a limit to how much they're producing, not producing more than what's needed.
How long does it take for like a company to get GOTS certified, like if they want to go that route?
Good question. Probably a few months. I mean, from application to certification. They can, if they're in a hurry, they can select expedited services, which means that I would get to them as soon as I can, and then they would get their certification decision within 2 weeks. But yeah, usually I'd say it's probably more like 6 months or so.
So you work with a lot of baby clothing and child. How do they, become more sustainable since kids are growing out of clothes all the time?
Well, that's a good question. One of the brands that I'm working with, they're doing a buyback program, which is becoming more popular with lots and lots of brands. I've seen shoe brands and adult clothing brands. They do a buyback, and then they're reselling the used clothes online. People are really loving that in the kids sector because of exactly what you said. Just kids are growing out of their clothing so quickly.
So I know, I've read many articles with farmers, especially smaller scale local farmers, that have they grow their crops with practices that are largely organic, but they don't have the means to go through the certification process and the costs associated. So if someone were interested in obtaining a GOTS standard, do they typically come to the organization and say, what do I need to do to improve my process to get this certification? Or are they kind of already there? And what's the cost associated with that certification?
Ooh, cost. It is not cheap. That's why we don't see. I work with a lot of smaller brands. It's important enough to them that they build the cost of certification into their, end product. But it's kind of a long question.
Are there people who are saying, this is a certification that I want? What do I need to do to improve my manufacturing processes or whatever part of the supply chain?
Okay. So in that case, they the certifier can work with them to a certain amount to help them get there, but really, like, they should hire a consultant. Yeah.
So, I know about B Corp and, you know, what they do and stuff like that. So, like, do you, like, work hand in hand with, like, moving forward companies to, like, get the B Corps, like, certification and stuff like that?
I don't do B Corp, and I don't really know exactly how they function. I work with several companies that are additionally B Corp certified. I'm not involved in that certification. From what I understand, they don't actually have an auditor come in. It's mostly record keeping. They're sending records to the people who certify B Corp, and they review them and then give them their certification. Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Is there any type of sponsorship program where larger organizations can pay and it go to other companies to be certified within GOTS?
Not that I know of, but you know there are I know in USDA Organic there are grants and scholarships for sure for farmers to reduce the cost of certification. GOTS, I don't really know that we have like a cost share program, but you know there's certain, to a certain extent I can try and reduce the cost of their inspection by booking clients that are close together on the same trip, so that they can share the cost of my trip itself.
And about how many inspections do you do a year? Or how many certifications do you do a year?
Probably around 100. Yeah.
Wow.
And do you think it's beneficial to have one person inspect the entire chain, or do you think that a model could be to move forward that someone specializes in, you know, a certain stage of the process and sort of break it down that way?
Gosh, that's a good question. Both. I think there's benefits to both. I love being able to see the whole supply chain, and then like I have all these connections with all of these different people throughout the country, and I can point them to each other and be like, this person does this and this person does that, make connections there. I really enjoy seeing the whole thing. It's very satisfying. But then something like wet processing, like the cotton cleaning process, which involves a lot of chemicals, it's beyond my like my training and my scientific knowledge to really understand all of that. So like maybe specialization in that area. That's probably the most complicated part of the GOTS standard, though, is anybody using water and chemicals like dyes or cleaning detergents.
How do you cope when you see, like the social responsibility aspects when like workers don't have the good conditions? Like I can imagine that might be heavy to have you.
Yeah, it's really rough. Yeah, I don't really know that the emotional labor aspect of my job is taken into account. I'm one of the only people at my company that does the GOTS standard, and I tried to express this before to like HR. And I think my supervisors understand it, that you know it's not just that we're seeing environmental destruction in action, but like with GOTS, yeah, it does take a heavy emotional toll. But you know, in a way, like, you know, I'm very grateful for my job because it's very eye-opening. I live in Portland, Oregon. It's a bit of a bubble, and I am really grateful to like not be stuck in that bubble and to have a greater understanding of the world. I mean, my job has definitely given me like a way broader understanding of the world than what I used to have. So, yeah, it's rough, but yeah, it's real.
Generally, this is kind of related to Kira's question. Are you generally working alone or in a team?
Mostly independent, yeah. Yeah. Like I have coworkers, but I go on inspection trips alone and do inspections alone. I used to be an independent contractor. Now I'm an employee. It's nice being an employee because I do actually have coworkers, and I'm not truly just like out in the world running around alone.